I'm going to start. All right. And so once again, we want to welcome you this afternoon to Healthy Foods for Healthy Kidneys. We are going to focus on discovering how foods can prolong the life of your kidneys. And I know Carolyn gave a brief introduction of herself. I am going to just give a brief introduction of the SRC for those of you who are not aware of who we are. So, the SRC, the Senior Regional Collaborative, is a nonprofit association of government and nonprofit organizations that serve persons living with disabilities and caregivers. We provide our member organizations with networking, training, and funding opportunities, helping them to build partnerships and provide and improve the quality of life for older adults, people with disabilities, and caregivers in Michigan. So we want you to stay engaged with us, connect with us on all of our socials. You can find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, visit our website. And for those of you who have not met me, my name is Lisa Hill, and I am the operations coordinator for the SRC, and I help put together the different trainings that we offer. So again, introducing Miss Carolyn Jennings. She is a dietitian and diabetes educator for the National Kidney Foundation of Michigan. She received her master's in public health from the University of Michigan, where she also completed her dietetics training and internship. Carolyn has worked as a community dietitian and diabetics educator in Detroit for the past 28 years. During this time, she has worked on a variety of programs, including early childhood and nutrition education, diabetes prevention and management, and chronic kidney disease education. Carolyn's mission is to share accurate information so that individuals can make informed choices regarding their health. She is passionate about diabetes and works to prevent diabetes in individuals who do not have it and prevent complications in those who do. Without further ado, I introduce to you Miss Carolyn Jennings.
Hey, Lisa. Um, Thanks everybody for showing up today. It's good seeing so many people here. As Lisa said, I am here to talk a little bit about, healthy food choices to prevent kidney disease and or to prevent it from progressing, for those that have been told that they do have chronic kidney disease. March, among other months, is National Nutrition Month. It's also National Kidney Month. There's different months, different days for everything anymore. There's a lot of information being shared this month, and so you may or may not have seen other things. I would, not hesitate to say the NKFM website, which is National Kidney Foundation of Michigan website, which I do have at the end of the slides, is a great resource, both for tools as well as for a lot of free programming that we offer. Um, so I did see, a couple of things in the chat. I'm gonna just kind of get started, but please, as I mentioned earlier, for those of you who have just joined, don't hesitate to speak up. I'm sure Lisa will be watching the chat. I probably won't as much, but don't hesitate to speak up, ask questions. I'd rather not talk the whole time. I'd rather have it be a little bit more interactive. So with that, I will get started and share my screen. So I'm just talking about nutrition and the impact that nutrition and food choices that we make can have positively and negatively on our kidneys. I'm going to focus more on the positives. I like to tell people what to eat instead of what not to eat. But I do have a few things that I'm pretty passionate or there's good reason to avoid or definitely limit if you have kidney disease at any level and or if you have it in your family. So I will share those as well. Um, okay. So I just want to just do a quick overview for those of you who haven't heard any other kidney presentations this month, to know why we talk about kidney disease, because it's a big deal. Kidney disease affects 1 in 3 adults. 1 in 3 are at least at risk, and most people eventually are going to see some decrease in their kidney function. So again, if individuals have high blood pressure, if they have high blood sugars or have been diagnosed with diabetes or even pre-diabetes, um, elevated blood sugars, elevated blood pressure, both damage the kidneys. So the key message is to know what your numbers are. If you have either of those, making sure that you're keeping those numbers as close to normal as possible, with medication and with lifestyle. And not ignoring them, because typically a lot of times people don't have any idea that they've got kidney disease, until because there are no signs or symptoms of it. And so until you're pretty far along or progressed. So a lot of times they call kidney disease a silent killer, but they can say the same thing about blood pressure, because typically people don't feel the symptoms of high blood pressure unless your blood pressure is really high. But again, elevated numbers do damage. So we want to do our best to keep our numbers as close to normal as possible. This just has some statistics here. Every 24 hours, 360 people begin dialysis for kidney failure. And again, those numbers don't have to be that high, but knowing your numbers, making sure that you know what tests to make sure you're getting and staying on top of your test results is really important. So it's not something just to passively sit by and wait for your healthcare provider to tell you that your kidney function, is decreased, or that we're really concerned about your kidney function. We want to catch these things ahead of time. So this is just to give you an overview of what the kidneys actually do. They're a huge deal in the body. I mean, they do more than just make pee, or make urine. So yes, we know that they filter the waste from the blood, which is, again, the body, typically your body filters the waste or all of the blood in your system every 2 to 3 hours. So, again, the kidneys are a huge deal, and they're pulling waste, and toxins from your bloodstream, on a very frequent basis. And again, they're excreting the things that your body doesn't need or aren't good for your body in the form of urine, and then they send the cleaned blood back, to your body with the things that they do need. So they're an integral part of balancing your minerals and your electrolytes. So calcium and potassium, sodium, iron, are all things that are both made and maintained, in your kidneys. So again, keeping those levels tight so that your heart functions properly, so that your nerves function properly, and overall, your body, is something that, is going to be able to maintain its organs. Blood pressure is regulated in the kidneys. So a lot of times I tell people, if your blood pressure is high in your periphery, which typically they do the blood pressure readings in your arm, typically it's 10 to 20 milligrams, per milligrams of mercury higher in your kidneys. So the reason that high blood pressure does damage to the kidneys is because it's even higher in the kidneys. When it's high in your arm, or when the reading from your arm, the kidney reading is even higher. And so high blood pressure, just like it can damage, the veins and arteries of in your overall body, in your kidneys, those veins, the glomeruli as they're called, are much smaller. And so high blood pressure can pop those a lot easier. And again, do damage that may or may not be able to be reversed. Um, the kidneys are also involved in making vitamin D, like that, the version of vitamin D that your body actually uses to lay down calcium or to hold on to calcium. So for bone health, it's the active form of vitamin D. So that, synthesis actually occurs in the kidneys. And then also the production of red blood cells. is involved via erythropoietin in your kidneys. So again, all these things, among others, are integral jobs of the kidneys, and that's why the kidneys have such an important function in your body, and also just maintaining your life and your health. These are the kidney tests, and I always just like to share these because these are tests that should be done on a regular basis. Hopefully you don't have to ask. And for a lot of people, especially if you have regular physicals, um, these are tests that should be in your medical record. So if you have access to a portal where you can look at your labs, looking up these tests and seeing what your eGFR or GFR is, so that's your glomerular filtration rate, and typically the E is because it's estimated, and that's just as a simplification. It's telling how well your kidneys are filtering. 100 is 100%. So the closer you are to 100, it's one of the numbers, the few lab numbers that higher is better. The closer to 100, the better. But as we age, typically that rate or that number will go down about 1 milligram per year. So it's not so uncommon for people in their 70s or 80s to have a GFR, less than 70. And again, what the important point here is knowing what is normal for you and if it's going in the wrong direction. So I say that about all your lab work. Know what your normal is and then know if it's going in the wrong direction. And particularly, even if you just have your labs done once a year, if you see a drastic difference from one year to the next, and this is with any of your labs, especially if it's a drastic difference in the wrong direction, asking your healthcare provider about it. Let's troubleshoot. Let's try to figure out what's going on here. Again, we don't want to ignore these things. It might be temporary. If you've had, a kidney infection or a bladder infection, if you've had kidney stones, then, sometimes you might see, especially if it was near the time your labs were drawn, you might see that your GFR has decreased quite dramatically at that time. But then I would also ask to have it checked again. Don't wait another year to have that number checked again. And the UACR, which is the urine test, basically is making sure that your urine is not does not have a lot of albumin, which is the protein, and or blood in it. Those things are not normal in urine. And your urine should not have a lot of albumin or as I said, the protein or blood in it. If it does, then that's basically saying that your filters or your filter that's letting out or passing through and allowing the urine to be released has got some damage to it, and that's why it's releasing things that your body should be holding on to. So you want that number to be less than 30, um, that urine albumin result to be less than 30, and your GFR, ideally we want it to be higher than 60, but it does depend on age. It does depend on a number of different things. But you want to know what your GFR is. I always look at trends in my results as well. You want to know what your number is, and as I said, if it's going in the wrong direction. So, anybody have questions about kidney function and or the tests? So homework assignment is going and looking to see what your numbers are. And also making sure that they're getting done, which pretty sure GFR is being done. I mean, it's been more than 10 years that we had it kind of mandated on regular health screenings, but we're always working a little bit harder to make sure that it's done, especially for people with high blood pressure, because typically people with diabetes, they catch it because we know that kidney damage can be a result of uncontrolled blood sugars, but high blood pressure, is honestly more prevalent. And a lot of times, as I mentioned, people don't, it's not detected is easily and or not managed as well. And that can be, equally detrimental, if not worse, to your kidney health. Okay, so causes of kidney disease, again, these are causes of a lot of heart health issues. But the ones that we can change are really the ones we want to focus on. And today we're going to talk about healthy eating, and I'm going to focus a little bit initially on the diabetes and high blood pressure, because as I said, basically about 80% of people with kidney failure, it's secondary to uncontrolled diabetes and uncontrolled blood pressure. The other thing to keep in mind is that for people that are taking, that people who typically it's people who have pain and take NSAIDs, which are your non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, ibuprofen, Aleve, trying to think of other ones, but I typically will say ibuprofen and Aleve. Um, those medications do damage to the kidneys. So they are excreted through the kidneys. All medications are metabolized either by your kidneys or your liver. Tylenol is liver and ibuprofen is your kidneys. So for people taking high levels of these medications, and particularly, I hear it a lot, like people who have arthritis or any chronic pain, these can do damage to your kidneys. So being aware of that and not taking any medications that you don't have to, not saying that, medications can't be beneficial, particularly medications for blood pressure and blood sugar obviously can be helpful to your kidneys. But pain medications, again, a lot of times, people get used to taking them because that's the one thing that helps them get through their day, but they do damage something. So, having those conversations and making sure you're staying on top of your kidney function, particularly if you regularly use any kind of NSAIDs. Obesity, and with obesity, I like to talk more about weight gain as we get older. So, again, holding on to your weight and even losing a little bit of weight, whether or not that, defines you as being overweight or obese, can go a long way to improving your overall numbers. So that includes your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your blood sugar, and overall can help your kidney health. So you don't have to be an ideal body weight, especially as defined by the BMI, to be healthy. But staying on top of your weight, trying to hold on to your weight and not gain weight is a huge success. And then losing a little bit of weight can go a long way to improve your overall risk for chronic diseases, including kidney disease. Smoking, vaping, anything is a toxin and can be detrimental to your kidneys, obviously, as well as your liver, and makes it harder to control your blood pressure. The other thing I just want to mention is kidney or bladder infections, particularly if you aren't on top of them or if you tend to have chronic kidney or bladder infections. And as caregivers, sometimes, I definitely saw it in my mom. I mean, she would have bladder infections at least 3 or 4 times a year. And typically she didn't have symptoms until it was pretty bad. So those definitely can do damage to your kidneys, and something as well to stay on top of. As far as the unmodifiable, these are just things to know. Like if you have a family history of kidney disease, as we get older, certain races and ethnicities, and or if you've had any kind of history of kidney injury, you're at an increased risk. So we may not be able to, change some things, but knowing those things also make sure that we're getting tested. If we've got a family history, we want to make sure your healthcare provider knows that, and we need to ask for these tests or make sure we're staying on top of our numbers, perhaps even more so. This is just a really old screen that I put together ages ago, but I just like it because it's simple. And, basically just talking as far as food goes, and I didn't throw exercise in here, but a lot of times I would put on the too little screen, I would put too little activity or too little exercise. Too many calories, too much salt, too much fat, particularly the saturated fats or the fats that are solid at room temperature. Not enough fruits and vegetables, not enough fiber, not enough activity can contribute to almost any disease. I don't have cancer on here, but cancer could be thrown in here as well. Many cancers are also affected by a similar like layout of macro and micronutrients. So, as far as nutrition and kidney health is concerned, the overall things that we talk about, and typically people should be assessed individually. I mean, again, you can look in general, but we always want to know what's causing the decrease in your kidney function, and we want to get on top of that. But for people that are just trying to maintain the health of their kidneys or prevent ending up with kidney disease or decreased kidney function, if you have any kind of elevated blood sugars, whether you have been diagnosed with diabetes, you have pre-diabetes, or if your blood sugar, even if you're somebody who has low blood sugars, because typically people who have hypoglycemia will see a pretty dramatic flux in their blood sugars. And a lot of times people will tell me, well, I've got the opposite of diabetes. I have low blood sugar. But if you have low blood sugar, there's some dysfunction for your insulin release in your body. And that's the reason you're having a low blood sugar. And a lot of times people with low blood sugars will have rebound high blood sugars as well. So again, any kind of blood sugar dysregulation is something that should be a conversation. Looking at how you can minimize those swings in your blood sugar. And obviously, the high levels are the ones that are doing the damage. So, not ignoring these things, staying on top of your blood sugar, managing your blood pressure, equally important. And typically the two go together. Most people who have type 2 diabetes already have high blood pressure. If they don't, that's a really good sign. But you want to make sure you stay on top of your blood pressure and keeping that as close to normal as possible. Medication is very helpful, but for both blood sugar and blood pressure, but it shouldn't be your only form of treatment. So when we're talking about nutrition, there's definitely things you can do to manage your blood sugar and manage your blood pressure and make those medications, work a little bit more effectively. Again, there's no clean drugs. All medications have side effects. All medications affect other parts of your body. Typically, again, the benefits outweigh the risks, which is why we use them. But you need to, make every effort that you can to work with those medications as much as you can. Maintaining a healthy weight, and again, a healthy weight is a very individual number. It's very individual for different people. But you want to maintain a healthy weight so that you can prevent infection. You don't want to lose muscle as much as possible. So, bad diets or quick weight loss diets, a lot of times it's one of the reasons that we really try to stay away from those because of typically what we lose when we lose weight quickly is muscle, and that's the last thing we want to lose for our long-term health. And then, again, maintaining a healthy weight to slow the progression of kidney disease. So as far as diabetes is concerned, um, for healthy kidneys, this is just some recommendations that I have for people that have diabetes or have elevated blood sugars. Making sure that you ask to see a dietitian so that you can get an individualized meal plan. Again, you shouldn't just be handed a meal plan. It seems like everybody thinks they should be on an 1,800 calorie diet because a lot of times that's what they are on if they're in the hospital. Or they come home with that. You need an individualized meal plan. You need something that works with you, that doesn't feel like a diet, but feels like something that you can do, you can maintain. And, it is something that overall is helping you achieve the numbers that you're looking for. Um, and then also, if you have seen one, do you need a refresher? You don't, it's not just a one and done. So if you went for diabetes education when you were first diagnosed, and it's been a couple of years, asking, that if you can see one again, especially if your numbers, and particularly your A1C is trending upward. So making sure that, you ask for those things, that be your own advocate, and or if you're advocating for other people, don't hesitate to ask for those things because, again, those are prevention. Those are helping us live longer, and maintain the quality of our life without the complications. On top of the A1C, are you regularly checking blood sugar numbers? And are you doing anything with those numbers? Do you know what they should be? And, when they are out of range, do you have an idea why? So again, just some questions to think about or to consider. Um, but a dietitian is really your best option for getting an individualized meal plan. If you have pre-diabetes, I highly recommend the diabetes prevention workshops. We do them at the Kidney Foundation. They're done through a number of the hospital systems in the Detroit metro area. But we do them virtually. So even if you don't, if you're not in the Detroit metro area, it's a year-long program. If you go and again at the end of the session, the WWW.NKFM, which is National Kidney Foundation of Michigan website, you can go online and look at the programs we offer, and see if that's something that might interest you. I facilitate them. I love them. They work. People who participate and stick with the program, it's a year-long program, will see improvements in their numbers. I would say 98% of the people who complete the program, and usually it's before the end of the program, will see, especially when they go in for a healthcare visit, that their numbers are improving. And by numbers, I'm talking blood pressure, blood sugar, and typically cholesterol, and a lot of times, weight loss as well. But the weight loss, is not as important, I tell people, as the other numbers. So, highly recommend that for people who have pre-diabetes. It is a program to prevent diabetes. It's not a program for people who have diabetes, which is a bit of a bummer. As far as blood pressure is concerned, knowing your numbers, again, super important. If you're asked to check your blood pressure at home or, sometime when you're not at the healthcare providers, doing that, tracking that, knowing, again, how to do it properly and having an idea of things that might trigger elevated blood pressures. Taking the medications as prescribed, and I say this about all medications. If for some reason your healthcare provider prescribes medications and you don't take them, you can't take them, you don't like the side effects, they're too expensive. Having those conversations is so important with your healthcare provider. Not, just letting them assume that you're taking them and then they're thinking it's not working because your labs aren't changing, your labs aren't improving. Limiting your sodium intake, which I think a lot of us, when you're diagnosed with high blood pressure, a lot of people hear, I need to watch my salt or I need to find ways to cut back on my salt or my sodium. Not, as I mentioned, not smoking or vaping, managing your weight. And then the other key is the DASH diet, which is dietary approaches to stopping hypertension, which is really a diet that's super high in fruits and vegetables. But it is a great way to help your medications work and also help your body naturally lower your blood pressure. So this is just like a really like snapshot view of the DASH diet. Um, and it is something that, again, it's NHLBI, NIH.gov is, or if you just Google the DASH diet, typically I would say dash.gov. There's a lot of great worksheets and a lot of good information as well as recipes for the DASH diet. So 7 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables a day are what's recommended, but not shying away from that if you're somebody who, doesn't eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. Anything you can do to increase the amount of fruits and vegetables you eat, can go a long way to help your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your blood sugar, as well as your weight. Any questions, comments? All right, this is just a kind of snapshot of a kidney-friendly plate. These aren't the only foods that are kidney-friendly, but these are some foods. And again, the plate being about half vegetables. I say fruits and vegetables. This one is kind of laid out as fruits on the side, but I honestly think any fruits and vegetables are beneficial. Yes, some of them are higher in carbs, some of them might be a bit higher in calories, but they all are loaded with nutrients. They're all loaded, they all have fiber. Eating your fruits and vegetables is not going to ever be a negative health consequence. And I say not, I shouldn't say never, because we can all go overboard with anything, but typically, fruits and vegetables aren't our problem. And particularly fruits and vegetables, whether they're fresh, frozen, or canned, but them on their own is a great way to get nutrition, to get fiber and a lower calorie version of nutrients that your body needs. As far as proteins are concerned, we'll talk a little bit about protein, and then your carbohydrates and or your whole grains, both of those being, about a quarter of your plate. So again, it really is very similar to a healthy plate. And whether that plate is a healthy plate for blood pressure, for diabetes, whether it's my plate, it's all pretty similar, and the recommendations are very similar, or I would say the same. Again, when you see a dietitian, you should be getting an individualized plan, because only somebody that can look at your labs and can, kind of take or have an idea of what you typically eat can give you the feedback that you need so that you can get the best meal plan possible. So I usually shy away from this. I don't really even like the word superfoods, but it gets touted a lot because people want superfoods. People want to hear about, okay, what am I supposed to eat? What are the best things that I can do? Are there any magic bullets? Are there any things that, that if I eat these, that, I'm going to maintain my kidney health? And the answer is no. But, there were some things. So I shared at the end, I've got some resources, and the NKF, which is the National Kidney Foundation, not of Michigan, but just the overall National Kidney Foundation, throws out different brochures for different, and they also have podcast called Hot Topics in Kidney Health. And so, they like to sometimes make things a little bit more competitive, with our current, like we want things to be, we want the marketing in them. So superfoods is kind of a way to market healthy foods. I always said if there were as many commercials for fruits and vegetables as there are for our highly processed foods or our fast foods or our not so high quality foods. A lot of us probably would be a little bit more interested or aware of benefits of fruits and vegetables. But typically the marketing is not with those foods because they just aren't snazzy enough, or, things that are considered exciting enough, and or there's not the money behind them to be able to market them like we do the other highly processed foods. So again, we're really looking for a well-balanced diet, and we're looking for more nutrient dense versus calorie dense foods. So especially as we get older, our body needs less calories, but typically we need the same amount of vitamins and minerals. So, the kind of extras that we may have been able to eat more of when we were younger. It's harder to fit as many of those in and still maintain our weight, and maintain our health as we get older. So, making sure that we're getting in the quality of food versus, quantity of food is even more important. And I just find, thinking about some of the foods that I don't really need. And a lot of times those are also the foods that I have a hard time limiting my consumption of. So once I start eating jelly beans, I can't stop eating jelly beans. So it's better I don't have jelly beans. So it's thinking about the challenges, thinking about what can get in the way. And then if I don't bring it in the house, then I can't start eating them. So again, it's little things that we can do to do a little bit better. Not that we have to be perfect, but do a little bit better so we can maintain our health. And obviously, the definition of maintaining our health is very different for different people. So it's thinking about what your goals are and what you can do to move towards those goals. So as far as superfoods for kidney health, probably aren't going to be a ton of surprises here. Fruits and vegetables, seeds and nuts, animal proteins are included. Plant-based proteins we tend to focus a bit more on, just because they are less detrimental to the kidneys, especially if we get too much protein. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Oils and fats, and then salt-free spices and herbs. So those are kind of the categories of what we consider, or the Kidney Foundation considers, superfoods. So these are some of the superfoods. And again, I don't want to, distinguish honestly between some and others. A lot of times one of the things that the Kidney Foundation did include in their superfood, and I did link the superfood like website, and there's a handout that goes with it, or a brochure that goes with it, to at the end of this. But a lot of times people think that, and I get calls all the time, I was told I have chronic kidney disease. Can I not have tomatoes anymore? And, people will say, and a number of these foods that are listed here are high in potassium. And people will say, well, am I supposed to limit potassium or potassium foods? And the answer to that is no, particularly fruits and vegetables, unless your labs are indicating that your potassium levels, that they're having a hard time keeping them under control. So typically people, if you Google, chronic kidney disease, you may see, low potassium diets. We don't want you on a low potassium diet unless your potassium levels are elevated or are running high, which means that your kidneys are not able to keep the potassium and sodium in balance in your bloodstream. So, um, but for most people, it's not the potassium in foods. It's maybe potassium additives. So, what I tell people to do if you're trying to watch the potassium, or if you've been told to watch your potassium, you don't want anything that has, if you look at the ingredient list, you don't want like a potassium sulfate or a potassium um, like chloride or potassium, anything that if potassium is listed in the ingredient, those are the potassiums that are, and they're typically in processed foods. And those are the potassiums that are more readily absorbed in your system. And if you're going to have a problem with potassium, those are the ones that are going to give you more of an issue than actually the potassium in foods. So things like bananas, things like tomatoes, things like citrus again, are all good sources and are sources of potassium, but are not an issue for most people with kidney disease. And I say, and particularly early stage kidney disease. So anything through, 3A, 3B kidney disease, most people are not going to have an issue with potassium. But those are labs that will be checked, and your doctor, your healthcare provider should be the one, giving you the individual guidance. So as far as protein's concerned, again, as I was mentioning, the focus is on plants. And, we can say this is for kidney disease. We can say it's for heart health. We can say it's for cancer prevention. Overall, I've been a dietitian for over 30 years. And basically what I tell people, and what I mean, I learned when I was in school, but nothing has changed, is less animal, more plant. In general, we don't have to be a vegetarian. We don't have to be a vegan. We don't even have to be a pescatarian, which is somebody who just eats fish and then, fruits and vegetables. But having less animal protein, and particularly animal protein that contains saturated fat, is heart healthier. So the less animal overall that we eat, even though there's this big push right now for protein and making sure we're all getting enough protein, because the average person doesn't get enough protein. Extra protein has to be metabolized by your kidneys. So if you're on a really high protein diet, particularly if you're somebody who takes protein supplements, you know, um, adds protein powder to things, consumes a lot of animal proteins, that can damage your kidneys because your kidneys have to balance out that extra protein, which is in the form of amino acids, to keep your pH in balance in your system, in your body. So because of that, extra protein just works your kidneys harder, which is why high protein diets back in the day were something that you weren't supposed to stay on for an extended period of time because they're damaging to your kidneys. So if you're somebody who feels like, oh, I've been told I need to eat more protein, I'm not getting enough protein, focus on more plant proteins, and try not to get an excessive amount of animal protein. And by excessive, um, overall, I say, you don't need more than half your body weight in grams of protein a day. And that's from all sources. So that's animals, that's plants, that's whole grains, beans, legumes, dairy. There's a lot of different sources of protein in our diet, not just meat, not just eggs, not just animals. Nuts and seeds are a great source of, or I should say a great source. Different nuts have different levels of protein. They're also higher in fat, but it can be a great snack. Nuts and seeds and any plant proteins also have fiber or can have fiber. You're not going to have fiber in any animal products, and fiber is also healthy for your overall body health, your overall body functioning, your brain health. It's great for your system functioning. So more fiber is rarely a bad thing. Not saying it, again, it's individualized, but most people don't get enough fiber. And it really does keep your body and your bloodstream functioning and also helps remove some of the toxins that can be excreted with the fiber, which is the part of the food that your body doesn't absorb. Anybody have questions? Um, the other thing, one of the things that was on the superfoods list was low phosphorus cheese, which I wouldn't have had any idea what low phosphorus cheese is. I've got this slide, and then the next one just talks about low phosphorus cheese. Um, so these are just some vegetarian sources of protein and with some numbers near them or next to them. So soybeans are a great source and a complete protein. They're one of the few legumes or beans that they would say have all the amino acids in them. So the example here is edamame. And ideally, for kidney health, we would say unsalted edamame would be what your choice would be. Lentils are another amazing source of protein, and also a great source of fiber. Eggs, again, an animal protein, but they're a good source of protein. And again, the egg whites, are where most of the protein is. So if you're watching your cholesterol, if you're watching your saturated fat in your diet, more egg whites and less egg yolks. Not that you can't have the egg yolk, but again, depending on everything else going on. And then some different other options here for getting protein in your diet. Um, and again, it says vegetarian, again, it depends how we define vegetarian. But some of these have more plant than others or more animal than others. And different forms of milk. So again, the alternative milk products can also be a good option. But it's always watching the ingredients and looking at those labels because we don't want the added sugars in the milk alternative products, which can, be cause of additional calories, and not necessarily as nutritious. So, um, just keeping that in mind.
Carolyn, I do have a question
Yep.
from Kim. Kimberly, she's asking, is it true you have to be careful with beans? They can be hard on the kidneys.
So that's something that a lot of people will think, oh, beans are high in phosphorus and certain beans are better than others. Um, so dried beans are always fine. Again, so I should say phosphorus and potassium are the two minerals that a lot of times people will be told to watch or to limit. But typically that is as kidney function is decreasing pretty substantially. On dialysis, it's a whole different ballgame, and that, you're going to have your labs drawn typically every time that you're dialyzed, and that's if you're going to a center. But so that's going to be, based on your labs. But prior to dialysis, as far as beans are concerned, yes, beans do contain phosphorus, but the phosphorus in beans is much less readily absorbed. It's the phosphorus additives that we really want to limit. So I think I did throw in the phosphorus. Oh, I might not have thrown in. It's the inorganic phosphorus. So phosphorus that is in the ingredient list is what we don't want to consume. But there's phosphorus in milk, there's phosphorus in chocolate, there's phosphorus in beans, there's phosphorus in whole grains. And all of those things can fit. As you can see here, a cup of milk is 240 milligrams of phosphorus. It's not an issue unless you've been told to limit phosphorus, but we really do find that the phosphorus additives, they're absorbed at almost 100%. Whereas the phosphorus that's naturally found in foods is only absorbed at about 40%. So it is much less of a concern. And, until you're told to watch that, we don't want you to limit healthy foods and beans being a healthy food. Now, the other thing I would say is that beans are canned, which I use more canned beans than I do dried just because I don't want to say I'm lazy. I just don't usually have time or think far enough ahead to prep the dried beans for cooking. But canned beans can have salt in them and have additives in them. So rinsing those beans can go a long way to reduce the sodium and any other additives that are in those beans. And also, rinsing them is going to reduce some of the phosphorus and the potassium that may be in those beans as well. So, again, the stuff, I call it the sauce, but the liquid or the thick liquid that typically is in the can of beans, rinsing that goes a long way to reduce phosphorus and potassium in those beans while you're still maintaining the nutrients and the fiber, and the protein in the beans themselves.
Awesome. I just went ahead and checked my can of beans to see if there was any added phosphorus. Think I'm doing
Yeah,
all right. I rinse mine all the time, so thanks for that.
yeah, no problem. These are the lower phosphorus cheeses. And as you can see here, potassium and phosphorus are both listed. Um, with the cheeses. Sodium again being a concern and something to watch. Obviously, salt, when it comes to cheese, typically salt and fat are what make cheese one of the things that really make it appealing or that people enjoy with cheese. But keeping an eye on those numbers, and again, any food can fit, but sometimes we just have to watch the portions. And if we can choose, a lower sodium cheese, or a lower phosphorus cheese, it can be a better option. But we don't always, again, have to watch the phosphorus. I have a cat going crazy right now. We don't always have to limit our phosphorus, so that is something to keep in mind and know that unless you're told that you have to, the cheese, and a lower phosphorus and lower sodium cheese can be a perfectly good option, or maybe something to try to incorporate a little bit more of if you are, trying to cut back. I say typically even more so just cutting back on your sodium because a lot of us get more than enough sodium in our diets um, than we need. So any way to cut back on sodium can be helpful. As far as spices and herbs are concerned, again, these can be superfoods. A lot of people, their benefits are touted of certain spices. We hear about turmeric, we hear about cinnamon. We'll hear sometimes about different chilies or, chili peppers or chili spices. Um, Again, spices. can be beneficial. They can be a great way to impart flavor without the salt. Knowing how to use them is an art, but also finding ones that you enjoy, finding spices that, appeal more to you or to your palate. I'm somebody who I could put cumin in almost everything. There's certain things that I really like, spice wise. So, as far as spices, are concerned, they can be a great choice. And again, I don't want to say there's any negatives with spices. The biggest thing I would say with spices is if it's not just one thing, like if it's not just cumin, if it's an Italian seasoning or if it's any kind of a blend, if it's not a Mrs. Dash, always check flipping it around and making sure that there's not salt in them because I can't tell you how many I've been disappointed in seeing that the first ingredient is salt or the second ingredient is salt. Even if it's not called a garlic salt or an onion salt. But sometimes they're just called some kind of a spice blend, but a lot of times salt's put in them both for flavor and because it tends to be cheaper than some of the other spices that are used in the spice blends. Herbs are another great option for adding flavor and at the same time being beneficial because they don't impart calories and they don't typically have sodium in them as well. And the other thing they've got here is, you can have herbs as tea, but making sure that, if you are um, using herbal teas that especially if they're not a mainstream one, that you talk to your healthcare provider or let your healthcare provider know that you are using these, when you do see them, just to make sure they don't interfere with any of the medications you're taking. And your pharmacist can also be somebody that you can ask those questions to. And then fats and oils. Again, when we're talking about kidney health, it's basically we're talking about the same thing as for diabetes or high blood pressure or cholesterol. Minimizing our saturated fats, not that we can't have any, but we want more unsaturated fats. So the monounsaturated, which is MUFA, um, and then the PUFA, which is polyunsaturated fats and less saturated and ideally little to no trans fats. Trans fats have been pulled out of most foods now because as soon as something gets a bad rap, it's kind of a marketing disaster. So most foods have removed their trans fat, and any food that has trans fat in it now is basically highly processed, the cheaper, highly processed foods. I don't know if a honey bun will ever be a good health choice any more than ramen noodles. Not to disappoint people on either one of those, but ramen noodles are deep fried. Your cheap packs of ramen noodles are deep fried before they're put in those packages. So even if we avoid the seasoning package, we're still basically not doing our heart any favors. We're better off just getting plain noodles and, putting some oil in it along with whatever seasoning we want to, and ideally not just a salt seasoning. But these are just some different healthier oils, healthier fats, healthier oils. And the smoke point is listed here because some oils you can't use to fry. You can barely use to saute. Avocado oil is one of those. So their smoke point, um, their smoke point is something that kind of keeps it from it will burn if the temperatures gets too high. So certain oils are better than others as far as sautéing or sorry, it's the opposite. Certain oils are better for, baking versus for sautéing or frying. So if your smoke point is high, it's a good choice. If it's low, it's not a good choice. So deep frying in olive oil can be a problem. Walnut oil and flaxseed oil, similarly, those aren't things that you want to fry in. Um, it's not listed here, but peanut oil is a good option. It's also a cheaper option because some of these are expensive. I should say a number of these are expensive. Peanut oil is also one that is lower in saturated fats and also something that if you are frying, can be a better choice as far as the makeup of the unsaturated versus saturated fats in that oil. Um, Foods to limit or avoid. I said I would share this one. Never, if you have any kind of decreased kidney function, you don't want to eat star fruit. Typically, it's not a common fruit that we eat here. It's not grown anywhere, I don't believe, in the United States. It typically comes from, Caribbean areas and or, Central or South America. But it contains a neurotoxin that is actually cleared by the kidneys. So if your kidney function is decreased, your body's going to hold on to that. And it can be very damaging to your body and your kidneys in general. So, star fruit is one of those things that if you've got any decrease in kidney function, um, not to consume it, or definitely don't consume it regularly. Natural licorice. So this is not the red vines or the um, Twizzlers, the red Twizzlers, but the black licorice, the natural black licorice is actually really high in potassium. Um, and actually, no, natural licorice lowers potassium. So whatever's in natural licorice lowers your potassium, but can again throw off your potassium. It also can raise your blood pressure. So natural licorice, if you really like black licorice, also limiting your amount, not consuming it on a regular basis. Um, so again, that's the aside for natural licorice, something I didn't know. Microgreens or sprouts, and I recently just was reading something about bagged lettuce, and by bagged lettuce, I mean the bagged chopped lettuce, are things that we should probably limit. And that's more because of the fact that it's really hard to clean these products, really hard to make sure that they don't contain um, uh, like any kind of a pathogen or any kind of like E. coli substance or substrate to make us sick. And particularly people who have any compromised immune function, these aren't things that are worth it. So the microgreens and sprouts are really hard to clean. And basically the only way to kill the pathogens or the E. coli in them would be to cook them. And that's not typically how we consume microgreens or sprouts. And then as far as the bagged lettuce goes, not only there, I was just reading and it was just saying, like if you're going to get romaine lettuce, you're much safer getting a whole head of romaine and cleaning it and cutting it yourself than the chopped romaine, which not only is it chopped, but a lot of times, it comes from multiple heads of romaine. So and once one is like chopped in the processing, however they process it, then that if there's one that is contaminated, that contamination can go on to lots of heads of or bags of lettuce. So, it was just not when, but knowing that we were going to have more outbreaks of foodborne illness due to chopped lettuce. So, although it can be very convenient, chopped lettuce is something to definitely try to reduce in your diet. And particularly if you or yourself or you care for somebody who is immune compromised, we really don't want, we want to minimize the chance of foodborne illness, particularly because when you're immune compromised, and I always say young or old, it puts you at an increased risk for really having detrimental side effects if you do get a foodborne illness. High sodium foods, of course, and again, mainly processed foods. High sodium foods are something that, salt is used in processing. It's used as a preservative, which is great because the foods have a longer shelf life. But there, the issue with high sodium foods is that it's definitely tough on our kidneys and makes it more challenging to keep our blood pressure under control. Makes us more likely to have water retention, which again is not good for our blood pressure or our kidneys. So, the more we can reduce the sodium in the foods we consume, and always trying not to add salt to foods can go a long way for our heart and our kidney health. And then, as I was mentioning earlier, salt substitutes. So these can be light salt, these can be no salt. It typically is potassium chloride, and you can check to see on, if you have any salt substitutes. But typically, people with high blood pressure, people, especially if you're on medications for high blood pressure, sometimes they will be potassium sparing medications, and or any kind of kidney disease. This is the potassium that is absorbed readily into your system and can really throw your levels off. And what happens if your potassium levels go too high, which is typically what happens when your levels go off, is it can throw you into heart arrhythmias. So a lot of times people will end up in the ER if they consume too much of a salt substitute, because it can throw your heart rhythm off. Anyone have questions about these? I rarely tell people not to eat something, but these all have pretty strong backing for reasons not to consume them. And again, not that no one can use these foods or can consume these foods, but just being aware, and particularly if you've got decreased kidney function, these are all foods that you want to be more cautious about using or trying to reduce. So these are just high sodium foods. Again, these aren't the only high sodium foods, but just some to be aware of. Um, and again, typically what we recommend and the general number is no more than 2,300 milligrams of sodium a day. But for anybody with blood pressure or with kidney disease, we'll say less than 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day, which can be really challenging, particularly if you're someone who doesn't cook, or relies more on, ready to eat or processed foods. And again, not that they can't fit, but thinking about ways to make them go further. And typically, what I'll say is this is a great place for frozen fruits or vegetables to come into place, particularly, I'll say frozen vegetables. If it's somebody who, likes and can rely on canned soups, if you can add any kind of frozen vegetable, and I'm saying frozen vegetables without any added sauces or seasonings, that is a way to extend the soup without sodium, both making it go further, adding some more nutrition, and kind of reducing the sodium per serving. Just as kind of thinking of foods that don't have salt as a way to extend some of the ones that do. Anybody have any questions? This is just the nutrition facts label that we share for kidney disease. It's just your standard label. But most foods don't have phosphorus listed on the label. It's not something that has to be listed, and typically is not listed. Potassium, on the other hand, a lot of times can be on the label, but of course, I don't see it on this one. Um, oh yes, I do. Sorry. Potassium is listed right under sodium, and it can be. It's not required to be on the label. But again, when we're looking at things, um, I always say, always look at the milligrams. Don't look at the percentages. As far as the percent daily value is concerned, those to me are just confusing and they're not individualized. It's just a general number. They can be good if you're trying to compare things like whether something is low, or high, based on something, but I find it really confusing. So I tend to look just more at what's listed. The biggest thing to look at when you're looking at the label is the serving size. It doesn't mean that that has to be your serving, but knowing that everything listed below that is based on that serving size. So in this case, the serving size is the whole container. Oftentimes that isn't the case. So you always want to compare your serving to the serving size to know based on that, the other information that's listed on the label. As far as phosphorus is concerned, this one does say phosphorus is 30%. The biggest way, as I mentioned, to know if there's phosphorus in the food, and these would be a phosphorus additive, is to look for it in the ingredient list. So in this case, there's phosphoric acid, which is a preservative that's in this ingredient. So these are just ex some examples of how phosphorus can be included in ingredients in food. So anything with PHOS is something that you don't have to stay away from it, but you want to be aware of, and you definitely want to try to minimize those foods if at all possible. And the other one too, if you see potassium listed in an ingredient list, typically it's just an additive or, it would be an additive. And that's something also that you want to be aware of. And, trying not to overconsume those foods as well. These are the resources that I was commenting on. I found listening to, um, the hot topics in kidneys, the plant-powered kidneys renal dietitian has a ton of great resources on her website. I just going through her blogs, they're all like just short excerpts on different aspects of kidney health and different foods. Really a really great resource. I just shared it with my team because I did not know about her at all, and great useful information. The superfoods is the link that I was saying, that I kind of based some of the superfood listing off of, from the National Kidney Foundation. And then there's just some other resources here, to look at things like potassium and phosphorus in foods, both from the Kidney Foundation, the National Kidney Foundation. And then these are just some resources, again, some general resources. The second one is from the National Kidney Foundation. The first one's from the CDC. And then here's the NKFM website that I mentioned. Again, we have a lot of great programs, as I mentioned, including the diabetes prevention workshop, that is available. And most of our programs are free or, very little cost. So if you have not checked out the Kidney Foundation website, I would recommend that you do. So that's my presentation. We talked a lot. Anybody have questions, comments? Anything else you'd like feedback on?
Taking a look at the chat now. Someone said, "Oh, no ramen noodles."
Yeah,
Um,
there's nothing you can't have, but not definitely. I know they're cheap. I lived on them when I was in school to become a dietitian, but definitely not something that I incorporate. I just don't, there's stuff I don't bring in the house anymore. Ramen noodles would be one of them.
yeah. So someone's asking, are there any examples of a herbal tea that interferes with medication?
The one that I was reading, as far as the kidney health, I was just reading some of the blogs. Um, be careful of any of the diet teas or the laxative teas.
Mm.
Um, you know, uh, those are ones you have to be cautious about. And again, one of the reasons that they are considered diet or laxative teas is they tend to dehydrate you and or, you know, sometimes they will be ones that cause you to have more bowel movements and or diarrhea. Well, anything like that is pulling water into your colon, into your, which again is going to work your kidneys. So those would be the ones I would be the most cautious of. Other than that, your plain herbal teas typically are fine. Caffeine overall is not an issue. Too much caffeine, so again, your body kind of adapts to how much caffeine you consume, but a general limit is 400 milligrams a day. So typically from teas and from a normal amount of coffee, that's not an issue. And even, people say, oh my gosh, what about these energy drinks? Well, again, in reason, an energy drink is not an issue. If energy drinks are the only thing that sustain you through the day, then there might be, a level of concern there. But when we're looking at teas, some of them are caffeinated. Herbal ones tend to not be caffeinated. Um, but just being aware of how much caffeine you are consuming, if it is something that's all you're drinking or all you're sipping on.
All right. Any other questions? I am dropping in the chat a link for our evaluation. If you would please be so kind to fill out that, complete that evaluation form that assists us in bringing more programming such as this wonderful workshop to you. So we like to get your ideas and we want to know if you find value in these workshops. So we thank you again for being with us today. And you can look for a certificate of attendance as well. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks,